I can usually tell within 5 minutes of talking to a new client why someone's group program won't fill. They will usually tell me things like people love it. I get really, really great feedback. Everyone says it's amazing. When clients are in, they never leave. And then they quietly will add or say something like, but I can't seem to get more than 5 or 6 people to join, or I'm really struggling to get enrollees. I'm, overworking on my launches. I've been spending money on paid ads. I've been investing a lot in lead generation, and I just don't know what to do anymore. And I want you to think about the last time you didn't buy something that you actually liked. Not because it was bad, not because you didn't trust the person who created it, but because you couldn't quite justify the actual decision. And that's what's happening with most coaches when they're selling group programs that won't seem to fill, especially if they're selling at that like $2,000 to $3,000 to maybe $10,000 to $15,000 price point. It has nothing to do with your audience size. It has nothing fully really even to do with like what launch event, whether you're doing webinars or a 5-day training or a 3-day challenge. It has everything to do with whether or not your messaging actually mirrors your current buyer's reality. The promise of your actual program is outcome driven, and that outcome driven promise justifies the price point of the investment and whether or not you have a claim or a guarantee that reduces perceived risk. And I think these are the elements that when I am working with coaches and I am working with service providers who are trying to, have more scalability and create more leverage in their business beyond just private one-on-one delivery, this is usually the culprit. And this is something that most people skip over. They think about what is the actual offer that I'm selling. They spend a lot of time on what are the features going to be? How much access are clients going to get to me? How many weeks long is the program going to be? How much content am I going to put in it? Which has a lot to do with the features of the actual product that you're creating, which is really important. But you are usually, or what I see often is that people are usually making that decision to try to appease to the vocal requests of what clients say they want without ever really calibrating whether or not, what is a qualified lead versus who this program ideally could work for. That's a really big distinction because who your offer could help is probably very wide and vast. But when you start raising the price of your offer to that $3,000 price point and above, you have to think about not just who you could help, but who is the most qualified individual and who are you specifically designing every element of your program for. And you have to also think about your messaging. So it's not just about you having your coach hat on when you're thinking about, well, who could I help? How can I service them? But I want you to start thinking like a marketer. What level of sophistication do you need to be speaking at in your public messaging 80% of the time to attract the caliber of buyers that will, align directly with this offer? And that's a huge distinction. The other thing is that outside of just focusing on the features of what it is that you are selling and what the actual promise is going to be, I think that when you again throw on that 4-figure price tag, you start selling $3,000, $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 offers, you have got to start thinking about buyer psychology and not just the positioning of the offer itself, but how is your messaging supporting the efforts that are needed to sell that individual offer? So I want to walk through those 3 things that I just mentioned and break this on a little bit further as to, again, the thing that most people skip over. I would highly recommend that you grab a notebook for this. If you've been working through this or struggling with this or kind of at a standstill when it comes to this. But one of the main reasons that I see with clients is that your program lacks a claim that reduces perceived risk. This is probably one of the biggest statements or the biggest reason, especially when selling group leveraged offers at that higher ticket price point. Is your program currently right now positioned with a clear promise and an articulate claim that reduces the perceived risk of the person that you are trying to sell it to? And I think that is a huge reframe. If you can start to think about your offers in the sense of, instead of looking at it as like, is this good? And like, can I deliver? I want you to, which is you functioning from like a service provider, a coaching mentality, which is important. Like clearly you care about your clients getting results and you care about being of service to your clients once they're in your ecosystem. But when we start to think like a marketer, and I want you to ask yourself, is how I am publicly articulating this program, is how my current messaging and my overall content, when people consume my content publicly, is there, a bingeable body of work, and what people are consuming with my messaging, does it reduce their perceived risk? Does it reduce their perceived risk? And high ticket buyers, and I don't want to say when I say high ticket buyers, I just want you to think about what is the psychology, what are the questions, what is the level of discernment that a prospect is using to make that buying decision. When you are dealing with a more discerning buyer because the price tag is higher, they are not just asking themselves whether or not your program is good or bad. They're not even asking themselves whether or not they trust you. Those need to be givens, if they're going to even entertain anything with a comma in it. What they're really asking is, what happens if this does not work for me? What level of risk am I willing to take on how this offer is being articulated, how well this program promise is being positioned, and how consistent the public messaging has been as it relates to who I am, what I'm looking for, my exact moment in time? How much of a risk do I feel if this doesn't work for me, also given what the price tag is? And without a really clear program promise and a strong claim, that is where hesitation increases. That is where objections will linger, and that is where enrollment will really start to stall out or cap really early on. And I'm going to give you some examples of this here in just a little bit, so I can really drive this point home. But most of the time when I'm working with people who already have existing group programs, they've been able to sell it, maybe they get 3-5 people in, maybe they're getting maybe 15 or 20 clients a year, but they're really trying to grow it, is that they have a program promise that is very philosophy driven, meaning that it's process oriented, which does build trust, but the reliance on how they're getting sales is really dependent on how long that person has known you. So instead of the person buying because they have really strong conviction around your offer, they've probably either come from another program that you sell, they were a former client of yours, they were highly recommended and referred, or they've just known you for years. So there's this innate trust they have with you, not necessarily with how you have positioned and articulated the offer. And when you are trying to scale beyond that group of your audience that has that innate deep trust with you, these are when these other elements are crucial to have in place. If your promise right now, or how you're articulating your program, speaks to this philosophy or speaks to the approach that you take, but it may not be justifying the actual investment for somebody who doesn't have that existing relationship with you. So your process-driven outcome, it speaks to who this is for, how you might think, what you might stand for, which is important. But the process and the philosophy alone doesn't explain why someone should spend $3,000 to $10,000 right now. Urgency. Alignment within your offer will attract attention, but it doesn't always actually close the decision making, especially at that price point. And I keep contextualizing at that price point because buyer psychology changes when in our online education coaching industry around that $3,000 price point and beyond. Prior, under, if you're selling something that's under $2,000, it's more of an impulse-based purchase, in my opinion, more higher volume. You can kind of get away with different things. You market and message differently. But when you're at that $3,000 plus price point, again, you are dealing with a much more discerning buyer. They are looking for different things to close the gap to make a decision. The second thing is that most group programs explain the method. They do not really articulate the outcome or the relief. And this is where I see a lot of my clients when they come to me, when they are telling me how they've been selling their offer, or I read through their sales page, or I read through their emails that they're using during their launches, is they are heavily focusing on the features. They are heavily focusing on how many calls that are included, how often they meet, how long the program is. They're using language that's a bit broad and more generic, but what they're really selling is the features, or they're really, really selling they start layering on these fast action bonuses or these pay in full bonuses that are, again, only really focused on access to them or the features that the program offers, which again is an attribute for what somebody needs to make a decision. But buyers aren't paying for just the features of what you will be teaching them at this price point. They are also, and more importantly, when it comes to how they're making the buying decision, they are paying for what gets easier immediately. Whether or not your messaging is speaking to the exact moment in time that they are currently in. There's a level of specialization. There's a level of specificity. There is, they are paying for your ability to articulate the contextual nuance of their situation, not just the number of calls that they can expect over the next 12 weeks. And they are paying for that relief needs to be very, very obvious, or else the urgency will disappear. And again, I'm going to show you an example of a business. Actually, let me pull it up right now. So when we think about this, and let's say I was dealing with a business coach who specifically works with event planners, okay? If we were talking about our philosophy, process-driven program promise, it might sound something like this. I'm supporting event planners in creating meaningful, memorable experiences for family. That is a type of promise that I will see clients come to me with, or I will see in the market, or I'll see in people's Instagram bios, or the main header on their sales page. And it's like, is that accurate? Yes. Does it kind of convey the values that you have around the type of events that you want to help, your clients be able to achieve? Yes. Is it really communicating a level of conviction? No. Is it vague and generic? 100%. That might work for a $97 offer or a $200 offer. It is going to be very, very difficult to sell at a $3,000, $5,000 price point. Now, if we shifted that promise to be more outcome driven, more of a real promise statement, I'm going to give you this example. The same business coach that coaches event planners, the program promise being rebuild your kids' party planning business in a new city by becoming locally discoverable through Google and Instagram without waiting years for referral. Do you see the difference? This outcome-driven promise goes from supporting event planners to working with people who are calling out a specific moment of time, event planners who have relocated to a new city who need to rebuild their kids' party planning business. Way more specialized, way more specific. And if you're a prospect, and if you are somebody who has recently relocated to a new city that is a party planner for kids' events, you are immediately going to have a higher level of trust, a higher level of alignment, and your perceived risk is immediately going to drop for the person selling that offer versus the person just saying, I help event planners sell more events, book more events. But the other thing that this outcome-driven promise statement does is it articulates the process without focusing only on the features. So it's articulating what is its specific approach, perspective, or point of view, which is about discoverability through Google and Instagram without waiting for referrals, versus just saying, we want to call in event planners who want to create meaningful, memorable experiences. So when we also layer in the messaging about that person in that moment in time with a very clear promise in regards to how am I going to help create relief for you, you have to first understand, what do they want relief from? When a person has relocated to a new city, they're like, how am I going to get new business? Because their business currently right now is dependent on referrals. So the claim that is being made in this outcome-driven statement is how do you do it through Google, SEO, and Instagram? That approach is what is going to create, again, that higher level of trust, but more importantly, reduce the perceived risk and really speak to what the outcome and the result will be for them. So those are, I think, when you think about the positioning of your program, you see how this has nothing to do with how many leads you have or what type of launch event you're doing. Because when people skip over the positioning of the program itself and start really overly obsessing over how do I grow my email list? Do I need to run paid ads? Should I be doing webinars or 3-day challenges or 5-day whatever, training events? Even if you do any of those things, you are still going to be in the same situation if you have a very weak promise and you have very weak positioning of your actual program. And that's why those efforts can usually be really exhaustive, can end up being very expensive, especially if you're doing paid ads, because you're prematurely trying to put ad spend on messaging that is weak not conveying what you need to convey and is not really calling in the type of people that you need to call in. So that is something that you really want to think about, is how can you better position your actual program promise and better define the attributes of what needs to be articulated within that promise to, again, reduce perceived risk for your buyer at that price point. So, and kind of coupling along with that is that like interest stalls when the outcome is too abstract. And that was a very clear example of that. If it's just like, hey, we help event planners, book more meaningful, memorable family events, versus we help the person that has relocated rebuild their kid planning business through Google and Instagram. That's a much more concrete, measurable outcome versus the abstractness of what was before. And when that promise is vague, people stay curious. They are apprehensive. They are hesitant. They ask way more questions, or they might not say anything at all because it's like it does not call them out and it does not create a level of safety when it comes to how they want to approach making buying decisions. So ambiguity feels way too risky at a $3,000 price point. Even if the offer itself is good, it's not about whether or not the offer is good. Because in order for them to ever even experience the offer, they first have to be willing to make a decision to buy the offer. And how you articulate that publicly, the level of conviction you have, not just in how you are selling it, but in the languaging and the messaging and the positioning that you're using to articulate the offer publicly, that is what gets the yes. And then once they're in the door, of course, you need to deliver on what you just sold. So higher ticket buyers are really evaluating risk, not just evaluating value. And I think this is one of the hardest mindset shifts for business owners to make. I think that this mindset dilemma normally shows itself around that 100 to revenue level. That's usually like a big mindset shift that I notice clients have at that revenue threshold because they've probably been able to get away with just being good at their job. And now they're like, how do I grow beyond 100,000, 200,000, break beyond that $300,000 in revenue? Being good at what you deliver is not usually enough anymore. You have to be really, really, really good at being able to publicly articulate the nuances of what you deliver to reduce perceived risk, in addition to still being able to deliver the great value that you've always been known for. And this is where you're kind of like growing beyond the trust of the ecosystem of referrals and relationships that you currently have. So at this price point, people, again, are not just asking like, is this valuable? Can they deliver? They're asking what happens if this doesn't work for me, like I mentioned before. And if your offer doesn't include that clear promise, and again, your ability to publicly articulate it. There's a difference between you being able to provide value and you being able to publicly articulate that value. And the last thing I want to really convey here is that when the offer is unclear, you end up doing the work in content or in context. And this is what I see happen a lot with folks who run group programs. When their offer is unclear, that usually means the process of what their program is designed around is very loosey-goosey. It's not curriculum driven. It is like, here are all these modules, but then there's also a lot of private one-on-one calls to fill in the gaps of what your curriculum is not doing. Or there's an excessive amount of group calls. There's an excessive amount of direct access to you. And again, when you have 3 to 6 people in your group, you probably can get away with it. But when you start having cohort sizes of 15 to 30 students, doing all that extra private one-on-one and all that extra customization is going to be your fastest path to burnout. And you've probably experienced it or got really close to that, So when your promise is not clear, usually your program curriculum is not tight, because it's not leading to a direct measurable outcome. It is just like, here are these things you need to know. But again, I'm filling in the gaps with you on these private one-on-one calls. And your clients stop trusting your curriculum and your content because they know that the only way to get the real results that they want is through that context that only you are giving them on their one-on-one calls. So you start over-explaining on the sales calls, you start over-teaching inside of your program, you start I don't even want to call it over-delivering, but it's just like way over-customization within the actual delivery of the offer. And that is where scalability gets very difficult, or where you will start intentionally capping your programs, or where you will start self-sabotaging your sales because you know that if your group actually grows, it will break you if you have too many clients in it because of how the delivery is designed. So those are the main attributes there. The last thing I want to mention is when I want to show you one more example of how to strengthen your program promise is outside of shifting from more of a process-driven promise and going to more of an outcome-driven promise, the other attribute that's really important is whether or not you have a claim or a guarantee. And this is something that I do not see a lot of coaches, service providers in our industry do, because having a guarantee means like you standing on business. Okay. It speaks to your reputation. It speaks to the level of conviction you have around the offer that you are selling. But having a guarantee that you can stand by, I've done this for years in my business. It is literally one of the best mechanisms to add to an offer to reduce that perceived risk, especially at that higher ticket price point, for that more discerning buyer who is very sophisticated, who has been burned and been around the block and knows what they want. And it's way better than just like, here's extra one-on-one calls with me, or here's $2,000 off if you buy within the first 24 hours. A guarantee, using this event planner example that we've been talking about, could sound something like this. If you don't receive at least one inquiry from Google or Instagram, not a referral, by the end of the program, we'll continue working with you for free until you. If I was on a sales call and I was still a little apprehensive and I heard them say, but baby, let me reassure you. Let me let you know how much conviction and confidence I have in my ability to support you. Here is the guarantee. Baby, at that point, I'm like, sign me up, pay in full. Because it reduces all risk if what happens if this doesn't work for me. And I think that when I'm coaching clients and I say, okay, we need to add in a claim or we need to add in a guarantee, depending on their niche, depending on their industry, depending on their price point, depending on how competitive their ecosystem is, I will recommend clients do this. Usually clients their butt clenches up and they get really nervous. And part of the reason why that nervous energy exists and why I encourage you to lean into that nervous energy is because when you decide to make a claim like that, you as the coach and as the provider and the creator of this program, you are now being defended. It is going to require that you no longer keep playing lukewarm. It is going to require you no longer saying this could work for anybody. Because when you make that guarantee, you immediately know damn well that this program is not meant for everybody. This program, everybody ain't qualified to be up in here. And it's you taking a stance. But it also immediately exposes where you are over customizing, being too generic, like playing it too safe with who your offer is for, who you'll allow in, how generic and broad your messaging is. It immediately exposes that. But the reframe I want to give for you is if you do feel nervous about like, how can I possibly make a claim? Yes, like this guarantee and this claim, one, you need to be ethical and function with an integrity. Your program needs to actually be able to deliver on it. And part of your program being able to deliver on it is by crafting a promise that directly aligns with what your guarantee is, having qualifiers to ensure that you only have the right people in the program that you could deliver that guarantee for. But the third thing that it does is it allows you to believe in your program so much that you're willing to even make that claim in the first place. And I think when we are selling offers and we're like, why is it not selling enough? The first person that has to be sold on your offer is you. If you are not sold on your offer, you cannot expect somebody else to not only be sold on it, but be sold on it at $3,000, $5,000, $10,000. You have to have the most conviction, the most confidence about your offer before expecting anybody else will. And I think a guarantee allows you to have that energy. Okay, it activates that energy in you. And I want you to believe in your offer so much so that you feel comfortable making a claim. And yes, when it comes to claims and guarantees, there are stipulations that we can put on it. There are rules that we can have clients follow. Just like if you were to go anywhere else and buy a normal product that comes with a guarantee, there's requirements. But it allows you to stop playing safe, being generic, being for everyone. Requires you to put a stake in the ground, to mark your territory, to be super defined in what you're doing and who you're doing it for. And that is what will get you to a place of scalability. You cannot scale being for everybody. And before you even start thinking, well, are there enough people who will buy this for me? Am I leaving people behind? Well, one, you're not leaving people behind, but you are being very, very specific about who needs to come on board. The second thing is, are there enough people? This is where I want you to run your numbers. And if you need help running your numbers, there is a cash flow calculator that you can grab for me. I'll leave it in the show notes. But run your actual numbers. Most of us selling high ticket do not need hundreds of thousands. Like we don't need hundreds. We definitely don't need thousands of clients a year to hit our revenue goals and our take home pay. We usually at most in a given year might need 60 to 100 clients, depending on the price point of your offer. And depending on the price point of your offer, you might need even less. So it's not like you're trying to attract thousands of people, which is the mentality that you would need and the strategy that you would need to have aligned. Again, if you were selling lower ticket, if you're selling a $100 offer, a $200 offer, or a $500 offer, but baby girl, you're not doing that. You're selling a $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 offer. You're trying to take home $200,000, $300,000 a year. That would change your life, right? You don't need 200, 300, 400 people to say yes to you. You need like 50 of the right people to say yes. And the beautiful part about it is when you choose to position your program with that outcome-driven approach, and you're able to make a claim or a guarantee, it is so much easier to get those right people to say yes at a higher ticket price point. And also the beauty of it is so many of them will stay with you for the long term. You will have much higher re-enrollment rates, much higher client retention rates, much higher client lifetime value. And like that is where your scalability will come from. It's not just from how many first-time purchasers you get, but from how many clients you're able to retain beyond the success of this program. Because once they succeed in this program, then they're like, I want to hire you one-on-one. You're going to charge even more for that. And it continues and continues. Or they're going to re-enroll in your program a second time or a third time, depending on how we design it. I really hope this was helpful. I'm going to leave some resources for you in the show notes to get the calculator, or if you're like, I need to go deeper, okay? I need to work on my program promise. I need to work on the positioning of that. I need to work on the messaging of that. I will leave information on next steps for you in a link in the bio. You can either check out the cash flow calculator if you need help with running your numbers, or I would recommend that you check out Leverage if you need help with positioning your program. And of course, if you have questions, send me a DM on Instagram or leave them in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. But really appreciate you tuning in, and I'll talk to you next time.